December 11, 1950. Kodori, North Korea. The Marines are evacuating. The entire 1st Marine Division is fighting its way south from the Chosin Reservoir. Thousands of men, hundreds of vehicles, one narrow road through Chinese-held territory. It's the largest combat withdrawal in Marine Corps history. And Corporal William Hayes is still on the radio. He's a communications specialist, 22 years old, from Ohio. For the past 6 days, he's been manning the division radio net, coordinating air support, relaying intelligence, keeping units in contact during the breakout. Now it's time to go. The last convoy is loading. Chinese forces are closing in. Everyone's leaving, except Hayes, because his radio is frozen to the ground. Let me explain. At Chosin, temperatures dropped to 40 below zero. Equipment froze solid. Engines wouldn't start. Weapons jammed. And radios which generated heat during operation would melt the ice beneath them. Then when you shut them down, they'd freeze to the ground in minutes. Hayes' radio had been running continuously for 6 days. The ice underneath had melted into a pool, then refrozen into a solid block. The radio was locked in place like it was welded to the earth. Standard procedure: abandon it. Destroy it so the Chinese can't use it. Move out. But Hayes had a problem. There were still Marine units on the radio net. Stragglers trying to find the convoy. Lost patrols trying to navigate to the evacuation point. If Hayes destroyed the radio and left, those Marines would have no guidance. They'd be lost in Chinese territory with no way to find friendly forces. So Hayes made a decision. He'd stay on the radio until the last Marine checked in. Then he'd destroy it and catch up with the convoy. His lieutenant said that was insane. The convoy was leaving in 10 minutes. If Hayes wasn't on it, he'd be left behind. Hayes said he understood. He'd catch up. The lieutenant ordered him to leave the radio. Hayes refused, said he had Marines on the net who needed guidance. He couldn't abandon them. The lieutenant could have made it a direct order. Could have forced Hayes onto the convoy. Instead, he made a different call. He told Hayes, "You've got 20 minutes. After that, we can't wait. If you're not at the convoy assembly point in 20 minutes, you're on your own." Hayes nodded, went back to the radio, and started calling for stragglers. Over the next 18 minutes, Hayes guided 7 separate groups of Marines to the convoy. Small patrols, 2 to 5 men each. They'd gotten separated during the fighting, lost their way in the mountains, and were using their portable radios to call for help. Hayes gave them bearings, landmarks, directions, talked them through the route to the assembly point. All 7 groups made it. 32 Marines who would have been left behind or captured. At the 19-minute mark, Hayes heard one more voice on the radio. Weak signal, lots of static. A Marine saying he was wounded, couldn't walk, didn't know where he was. Hayes tried to get a location. The Marine was disoriented, in shock, kept saying he could see lights but didn't know which direction to go. Hayes realized the Marine was seeing the convoy's headlights. He was close, maybe a quarter-mile away. Hayes started talking him in. "Move toward the lights, count your steps, tell me what you see." He stayed on the radio, guiding this wounded Marine step by step toward the convoy. At the 23-minute mark, the convoy started moving. Hayes could hear the engines. He knew they weren't waiting anymore, but he kept talking to the wounded Marine. "Keep moving, you're almost there, I can hear you're close." At the 26-minute mark, the wounded Marine stumbled into the convoy assembly area. He'd made it. Hayes heard other voices on the radio confirming the Marine was safe. And then Hayes shut down the radio. 26 minutes. 6 minutes past the deadline. The convoy was gone. Hayes grabbed a thermite grenade, placed it on the radio, and pulled the pin. The radio melted into slag, couldn't be used by the Chinese, couldn't be recovered. Hayes picked up his rifle and started running south, following the convoy's tracks in the snow. He was alone in Chinese territory at night in 40 below temperatures. If he didn't catch up with the convoy in the next few hours, he'd freeze to death or be captured. Hayes ran for 3 miles. Following the vehicle tracks, staying off the road when he heard Chinese voices. At one point, he hid behind a destroyed truck while a Chinese patrol passed within 50 yards. After 2 hours, he saw taillights ahead. The convoy had stopped for a vehicle breakdown. Hayes sprinted the last 200 yards and collapsed next to a truck. A sergeant pulled him inside. asked him what the hell he was doing running alone through Chinese lines. Hayes, half frozen and exhausted, said, "Had to make sure everyone was on the convoy before I left the radio." The sergeant stared at him, then said, "You stayed behind for stragglers." Hayes nodded. The sergeant called over the lieutenant, the same lieutenant who'd given him 20 minutes. The lieutenant looked at Hayes and said, "You got them all," Hayes said. "Everyone who called in, sir." The lieutenant shook his head. Didn't know whether to court-martial Hayes for disobeying the time limit or recommend him for a medal. He did neither, just told Hayes to get warm and stay with the convoy. That was it. No paperwork, no official report. Just another day at Chosin where everyone was doing impossible things to keep each other alive. But the 33 Marines Hayes guided to the convoy remembered. After the war, they tracked him down. Found out he'd left the Marine Corps in 1952, gone back to Ohio, was working at a factory. In 1955, they organized a reunion. Invited Hayes as the guest of honor, told him, "You saved our lives. We were lost and you stayed on the radio when you should have been running. That took guts." Hayes was embarrassed, said he'd just been doing his job, that any communicator would have done the same. They told him that wasn't true. Most communicators would have followed orders, abandoned the radio, saved themselves. Hayes had risked his life for Marines he'd never met, whose voices he'd only heard over a radio. That was something special. The group took up a collection, bought Hayes a plaque. It said, "To Corporal William Hayes, the last man out. Chosin Reservoir, December 11, 1950. Hayes hung it in his garage, didn't talk about it much, but he kept it his whole life. When he died in 1998, his family found boxes of letters. Letters from the Marines he'd guided to the convoy. Letters thanking him, telling him about their lives, their families, their careers. 33 Marines who'd made it home because one corporal had stayed on a frozen radio for 6 extra minutes. That's the story of the last man out. Not the most dramatic story from Chosin. Not the one with the most casualties or the biggest battle. Just one communications specialist who understood that his job wasn't to protect his radio. It was to protect the Marines using it, even if it meant risking everything to guide them home.